Hey everybody, welcome back to another thrill-packed, action-racked episode of Whatcha Readin. People ask me all the time, I guess because I'm a professional writer, what am I reading? When I'm not writing, what am I reading for pleasure, for research, for information, whatever, distraction. Um, and this week it, I read some stuff in regards to a question asked on Ask Chuck Dixon. Someone asked me if I was aware of treasure chest comics. These are comics distributed through parochial schools. I don't know if they're still around or not. It'd be a shame if they weren't. But I didn't know a lot about them. I was certainly aware of them because I attended catechism classes when I was a little boy. Uh, I was raised Catholic, but I went to a public school because I was given a choice between public school and parochial school. And my sisters, my older sisters who went through the parochial school system, said, "Go to public school because the nuns beat you," which they didn't, but they were trying to convince me not to go to Catholic school. I think because they didn't want me following them to school. They didn't want me in their school. So they lied to me about cruel and nasty nuns can be. Not to say that nuns can't be cruel and nasty. Anyway, I'm off on a tangent. Treasure Chest was a comic. I learned more about it. Treasure Chest was a comic, and it was a full size comic book that you would have spent 12 cents to get at the drugstore. Probably printed by World Press, the same place that was printing all the rest of the comic books. And it was distributed uh, every other week, every 2 weeks during the school year. And I would go to these catechism classes at St. Andrew's, which was our parish church, and I would see these comics everywhere. They were on desks, on tables, in desks. They were readily available. I don't know if the kids paid for them or they were distributed free, or back in those days, comics were disposable. Maybe the kids had a subscription and they were done reading it, so they just left it for anybody else who wanted to read it. Anyway, I wasn't all that interested in them because I was like 6 or 7 when I was in catechism. I keep saying catechism classes. So I was way more into Spider-Man and stuff like that. But I definitely recall them and had a vague recollection that they were competently done. Just didn't particularly interest me. So because of the question, I thought, well, let me look further into this. This is a corner of comic history I'm just not that familiar with. So I went on eBay and found out that these things are really affordable, probably because they were printed in the millions. I mean, they were distributed across the American and possibly Canadian Catholic school system. There were millions, had to be millions of these things in print. I'd argue that probably during its run, during its heyday, Treasure Chest was probably it was the most distributed comic with the highest circulation of any, but I'm just guessing. Anyway, I ordered a bunch. You can go on eBay and find lots of these things. By lots, I mean, you know, uh, a lot of, 20, 30 of these things for, $20, $15 for a big old stack of these things. And so I bought a big old stack and I read a bunch of them. And I got to say, I was impressed and I learned quite a bit. Treasure Chest was obviously aimed at kids. Um, it seems like the stories largely would appeal to boys. And maybe the thinking was when Treasure Chest was created, whether this would counter boys reading, nasty, nasty newsstand comics and becoming juvenile delinquents, which was what people were afraid of back then, as silly as that sounds. And of course, we're every bit as silly now, just about different things. But anyway, it's primarily aimed at kids and it appears to be primarily aimed at boys. There's very few female characters in here. And there's the usual humor stuff, which, an 8-year-old might find funny, but really isn't funny at all. And a long running, adventure series about the 49ers. And this one, which ran for quite a long time, called Chuck White. And it was drawn by Fran Matera. Now, Fran Matera worked for Marvel occasionally. and until he passed recently, lived here in the Tampa area. I ran into Mr. Matera at a couple of local cons, um, local comic shows, and I talked to him a little bit. But if I had known about his treasure chest past, I would have had a lot more questions because I wasn't that familiar with his work. And apparently, he mostly worked for Treasure Chest throughout the late 50s and through the 60s. But Chuck White adventure series about a young white kid. It's kind of in the name, isn't it? I don't think it was meant to imply anything, but the kid's name was Chuck White, the whitest name ever. And I say this as a Chuck. But there are other talents that comic fans, longtime comic fans, might be familiar with. Reed Crandall did quite a bit of work in Treasure Chest. Now, Reed Crandall was an old EC guy and known for his illustrative style. This story in particular was excellent. It was a story about the creation, the history of the Brooklyn Bridge. And I actually learned, I thought I knew a lot about the Brooklyn Bridge, but this had some facts in it I was not aware of. And Mr. Crandall's usual terrific style. Now, the one that I really liked was there was a 4-part biography of Douglas MacArthur, and it's drawn by Joe Sinnott. Now, Joe Sinnott famously worked for Marvel, famously, is considered by many to be the greatest inker that Jack Kirby ever had. And some of you here, on Ask Chuck Dixon informed me that Joe Sinnott did a lot of work for Treasure Chest, more than he did for Marvel, because Treasure Chest paid higher page rates. And this biography of MacArthur is terrific. It's penciled and inked by Sinnott. And it's great to see because, in my opinion, Sinnott, for drawing war and Western stories, was every bit the equal of Russ Heath or John Severin, which some of you may say, well, that's sacrilege. But I go back and look at his 50s Western and war stuff, particularly his Western stuff. Great attention to historical detail. His illustrative style, the heavy chiaroscuro, the historical accuracy, just the bravura. Now this is a bit tepid. I think Treasure Chest, this didn't look as violent as, say, the DC war comics of the time period, because they're sort of taming everything down. They're trying to stay away from what gave comics a bad reputation in the 50s. And these comics are all from 62 and 63. So, the Senate hearings about comic books were in a lot of people's memories, still in a lot of people's memories. So, these Treasure Chest comics, they're rather tame, but they're competently done. And I really enjoyed the MacArthur biography. And again, like with the Brooklyn Bridge story, I learned a bit. And I got to see some great Joe Sinnott work that I was never aware of before. I'm a big, big Joe Sinnott fan, and he's mostly known as an inker, but he was a terrific penciler and a terrific storyteller as well. Now, these weren't the only comics I read this week. I don't know why, but somebody posted this cover. Well, I don't know why. I know why they posted it. They posted it on Facebook, like they had just bought this, and I thought, wow, what an awesome cover. I don't have that one. I'm not aware of this comic. Giant size King Colt and Knight Rider. It was a 68 big pages. Well, they weren't any bigger than a normal comic, but you get the idea. And this awesome Gil Kane cover. And I thought, well, I'm going to pick one up. I found one cheap on eBay in less than mint condition and read it. I was just curious about it. You just, every once in a while, it's like, hey, that comic looks cool. Let me check it out. And it, it was apparently the first team up between Kid Colt and Knight Rider. And the lead story, it has the two of them meeting. And I got to say, it's pretty disappointing, pretty underwhelming. I'm generally underwhelmed by the person who wrote this. But what a lost opportunity. You think when two characters team up, they're going to face a adversary that they needed to team up to defeat. In other words, this guy, they're going to meet some tough hombre or gang, outlaw gang, that are so bad that the two of them have to get together to defeat them. They have to cooperate with one another. And this story is like the polar opposite of that. The bad guy in the story, bad guy singular, is a gambler with a Derringer, a two-shot Derringer, and in the very first page, he manages to put Kid Colt out of action, and the rest of the story is just so phoned in as this guy who only has a two-shot Derringer, it takes on, Kid Colt and Knight Rider and a whole posse, of sheriffs and deputies. He managed to hold them off. And I think that even the writer realized 3/4 of the way through the story, this is ridiculous. And all of a sudden, the gambler has a rifle that appears out of nowhere. The story's pointless. It chases its own tail. I mean, a story where these two Western badasses meet, you would think they would go up against the Wild Bunch or the Mexican Army or the entire Comanche Nation. I mean, something challenging, not just some card-playing doofus with a gun that only loads 2 bullets and won't hit anything further than 3 feet away. But there you go. Now, the rest of the book is reprints and a lot of Stan Lee and Jack Keller Two Gun Kid stories, which are perfectly serviceable, perfectly entertaining. Stan never wrote a story that didn't make sense on some level. But this one story is written by Denny O'Neil with art by Werner Roth, who is famous for his long run on X-Men. It's a good one. It's a good one. Denny liked Westerns. He really dug them. He knew how to write them. He knew how to plot them. And it's a good little, wanted outlaw, because Kid Colt is a wanted outlaw, framed for a crime he didn't commit, that kind of good guy. And it's a good story. It's a rip snorter, and I like Denny's Western dialogue, which he must have chuckled over himself. But we often think of Denny O'Neil as a resident of Gotham, as a New Yorker, but he was from St. Louis, Missouri, so he knew a thing or two about Westerns, and it's a good one. And Werner Roth does a good job. I never saw Roth on a Western before. I'll have to check out some more of that. And there's a Joe Maneely story in here written by Stan Lee. It's pretty cool. Joe Maneely, always terrific. This is obviously a later story, probably one of the last stories he drew before he passed away, sadly. And that's it. That's it for this week. That's what I've been reading, amongst other things. And thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And I'll see you all down the road.